A 16-year-old black boy stands trial for a crime he didn't commit, just like his father, who was wrongfully convicted 6 years ago. But this time, the boy has a plan. He's not just here to defend himself. He's here to make the court finally listen. Can one voice, armed with the truth, break through a system built to silence it? If this story moves you, please like the video and subscribe for more powerful, real-life inspired stories. Now, let me take you inside a courtroom where a boy dared to speak the truth and shook the system to its core. The courtroom was quiet that morning, too quiet. Like the air knew something was about to happen, something it couldn't prepare for. They brought Jamal in wearing a gray hoodie, 2 sizes too small, and a pair of scuffed sneakers. He was 16. Thin, tall, sharper in the eyes than most boys his age, but with wrists too small for the cold metal cuffs digging into them. To the bailiff, he was just another black kid with attitude. To the white couple who called the cops, he was a suspicious presence sitting too long on the steps of a vacant house. To the police, he fit the description. What description? Young, black, alone, in the wrong neighborhood. What they didn't care to ask was, why was he doing? Because the truth was too ordinary to fit the story they wanted. He was reading. That's it. Just sitting on a crumbling porch, flipping through a worn paperback. To Kill a Mockingbird, of all things. But in that zip code, in that skin, doing even that was apparently a crime. They didn't let him explain. Didn't ask what book he was reading, or why his backpack had school papers instead of stolen goods. They just pressed his face against the hood of the car, cuffed him, and told him he'd have to answer for trespassing. And now, here he was, standing in a courtroom built on polished wood and double standards. His public defender hadn't even looked him in the eye yet. Just skimmed the file, mumbled something about just plead out and go home, then went back to tapping at his phone. But Jamal wasn't going to plead guilty to something he didn't do. Not again. Not like his father had, 6 years ago. The judge hadn't entered the room yet. The room was still buzzing with whispers, papers shuffling, the usual sound of people preparing to ignore the truth. Jamal didn't speak, but his eyes did. They scanned the faces in the gallery, the jury box, the empty chair behind the bench, and quietly they asked, "If I were white, would I even be here?" When Judge Paul Harding walked into a courtroom, everything seemed to fall silent, out of respect or out of fear. Maybe both. He wore that black robe like it was armor. Impeccable posture, measured steps, not a single smile in sight. For over 2 decades, Judge Harding had built a reputation that preceded him. Tough but fair. That's what they called him in the papers. The iron hand of justice, local media once said. To some, he was a hero. To others, a symbol of how justice could be cold, distant, and blind. His record was clean, no scandal, no questions. Every sentence he gave with confidence. But Jamal wasn't looking at a symbol. He was looking at a man. The moment Harding entered, Jamal's eyes locked onto him, like he'd been waiting his whole life for this exact second. And when Harding took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and looked down at the case file in front of him, he didn't notice the way Jamal was staring. But the bailiff did. So did a reporter in the back row. There was something in that boy's eyes. Not fear, not defiance. It was something else. Recognition. Harding flipped through the pages. Just another case. Just another name. Jamal Williams, age 16, charged with criminal trespassing in a private residential zone, he read aloud, voice firm, practiced, distant. He looked up. Their eyes met. Harding didn't flinch, but Jamal didn't blink. There was a long silence, one that stretched too far for a simple misdemeanor. Harding cleared his throat, raised the gavel slightly. Before we proceed with the plea, Jamal stood up. No warning, no permission. Just a 16-year-old boy with handcuffs still biting at his wrists, rising slowly, steadily, like someone who no longer cared about the rules of the room. "Do you remember Derek Williams?" he asked, his voice low but clear. The courtroom rustled. Harding paused, squinted slightly. "Excuse me?" Jamal's voice didn't shake, it didn't rise, it sliced. "Derek Williams, my father." He took a breath. "And then, you sent him to prison 6 years ago, and 2 years later he died in his cell. And you," his eyes locked on the judge again, "you killed him with that." He pointed to the gavel. The sound that followed was silence, not the respectful kind, but the stunned, breathless kind. The kind that drapes itself over a room when something too true has just been said. The public defender froze. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably. Even the court reporter's fingers hovered, unsure whether to keep typing. Harding said nothing. He just sat there, holding the gavel, mid-air, suddenly heavier than ever before. And Jamal? He didn't sit back down. He stood there. 16. Cuffed, accused, and finally heard. You never forget the sound of a door being kicked in. Not when you're 10 years old. Not when the man behind it is your father. It was past midnight when they came. Jamal still remembered the thud of boots on the porch, the pounding on the door, 3 quick hits that rattled the frame like it was made of paper. Then shouting. Then the front door exploding open like it owed someone something. His mother screamed. Not a scream of surprise, but of fear. The kind that only comes from someone who's been waiting for this night, dreading it, but powerless to stop it. Derek Williams. Hands where we can see them. Jamal stood at the top of the stairs, pajamas hanging loose on his small frame, frozen. He watched as the living room filled with uniforms, as his father raised his hands, confused, calm. There's been a mistake, his father said, voice steady. I haven't done anything. I've been home all night. They didn't care. They didn't check. They didn't ask. They cuffed him in front of his wife, in front of his son. Jamal remembered one moment more vividly than the rest. The moment his father turned back as they pushed him toward the door. He locked eyes with Jamal, standing halfway down the stairs, and he smiled. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because he didn't want his boy to be. I'll be back soon, son, he said gently. I didn't do anything wrong. They'll see that. It'll be okay. That was the last thing he ever said to him. The door slammed shut. The house fell quiet. And Jamal stood there in the dark, gripping the handrail until his knuckles turned white. The days after that were a blur. His mother cried in silence, staring at walls that no longer felt like home. Bills piled up. The fridge got emptier. The phone rang less and less. When letters came from prison, she'd read them and fold them away without a word. Then one day, they stopped coming altogether. No warning, no reason. Just a call. One line. We regret to inform you. Jamal didn't understand how a man could go to jail alive and not come back. He asked questions. His mother had no answers, only silence, and one worn photograph of his father taped to the back of a closet door. They moved 5 times in the next 3 years, each move a little smaller, a little quieter. And in every place, Jamal would lie awake at night and whisper the only question that ever mattered. Why? No one ever answered. Not until today. There's something about old leather, that smell, that weight. It holds time like a secret. And when Jamal reached into his backpack and pulled out his father's journal, it wasn't just a prop. It was proof that truth still had a voice. He placed it gently on the defense table. The room quieted, not out of instruction but instinct. The judge leaned forward slightly. The clerk glanced up from her screen. Even the bailiff took a subtle step closer. Jamal rested his hand on the cover, like it was something sacred. His voice was soft, steady, but carried all the weight of the years he'd waited to speak. My father wrote this in prison. He didn't write it for lawyers or judges. He wrote it for me. No one's ever read it, until now. He flipped it open to a page marked by a folded corner, stained faintly at the edge, maybe water, maybe a tear. His eyes scanned the words, but you could tell he already knew them by heart. January 12th. They denied my appeal today, said the evidence wasn't new enough. How can it not be new if it was never seen? They never showed the security footage. Never called the neighbor who said it wasn't me. They don't want the truth. They want closure. They want a name to write down. And I was that name. A ripple of discomfort moved through the gallery. A woman in the second row shook her head. A reporter stopped typing, lowered her pen slowly. Jamal didn't pause. He turned the page. March 3rd. I try to stay strong for my son. I write him letters, tell him stories, pretend like I'm okay. But some nights, I press my hand to this cold wall and pretend it's his cheek. It helps me sleep. He closed the book halfway, took a breath, and looked up. Not at the judge this time, but at the room. He wrote that 6 weeks before he died. They said it was a fight, said he got into it with another inmate. But no one told us what really happened. They just sent us a box of his things and this journal. Jamal gently turned it to face the court. My mother never opened it. She couldn't. She said if she read his words, she'd break. So I waited. And when I was ready, I read every single page. It's all here. His pain, his hope, his innocence. He opened to the final entry, the paper softer from wear. I pray Jamal grows up knowing I loved him, that I didn't leave him, I was taken, and if he ever finds this, I hope he speaks louder than I ever could. The room was still. Not courtroom quiet, but soul quiet. The kind where even the air feels heavy with meaning. Someone sniffled near the back. The stenographer's hands hovered, frozen mid-air. Judge Harding shifted slightly in his chair, one hand on the bench, the other clenched out of sight. Jamal looked straight ahead, not pleading, not performing, just revealing. My dad was a man, not a file, not a number, not a case to be cleared, and he deserved to be heard. So today I'm making sure he is. He sat down without another word, and in that silence, it wasn't just his father who had spoken. It was every man, every woman, every child the system had forgotten. And for the first time in that courtroom, people listened. Judge Paul Harding had spent his entire life mastering the art of stillness. The robe, the bench, the gavel, it all gave him power. But power comes with weight, and today that weight was pressing down harder than it ever had before. He sat motionless behind the bench, the journal still open before him, though he wasn't reading it anymore. His hand rested on a silver pen, one he'd used to sign hundreds, no thousands of decisions. But now, that pen felt heavier than the gavel itself. He clenched it just to keep his hand from shaking. He could feel the eyes on him. The courtroom had fallen into a hush so complete it was as if the walls themselves were listening. And yet, it wasn't the silence outside that unsettled him. It was the one inside. Because something had cracked. Harding closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, he wasn't in the courtroom. He was back in his chambers, 6 years ago. A younger man, less gray at the temples, but already wearing the armor of confidence. The case file had been thin. No DNA, no fingerprints. Just a shaky witness report from someone who changed their story twice. And a defendant who looked exactly like the stereotype the public had already decided was guilty. Derek Williams, the file had read, male, African-American, prior misdemeanor, lives in a low-income area. The media was circling that case like vultures, pressure from the mayor's office, calls for swift justice, community leaders demanding answers, and the DA's office pushing for a conviction to set an example. Harding remembered asking, "Do we have enough?" And someone, he couldn't remember who, had said, "He fits the profile. The jury will buy it." He'd told himself it wasn't his job to question the system, just to enforce it. He told himself doubt is dangerous, that if they were wrong, the appeals court would catch it later. He signed the conviction. Now, years later, Harding sat on the same bench with that same pen, and a boy looking up at him with the same eyes as the man he once sent away. He stared at the journal again. Words written in ink by a man who had died believing no one would ever hear him. They don't want the truth. They want closure. Those words echoed in Harding's mind louder than any gavel he'd ever struck. For a moment, the judge looked like he might speak. He opened his mouth slightly, but nothing came out. Only breath. Shaky. Barely audible. Because how do you respond when the lie you built your career on just stood up in court and called you by name? Was it justice? Was it fear? Or was it simply easier to follow the tide than to stand against it? He looked down at the pen in his hand again, and for the first time in a long time he wasn't sure if he had the right to hold it. What is justice, he thought, if it requires a man to turn away from his own doubt? The courtroom waited. Jamal sat still, watching, and behind those sharp young eyes, Harding didn't just see a boy. He saw a mirror, a reflection of every choice he had made, and one he would have to make again, right now. Most boys at 11 are learning how to ride a bike with no hands or sneak snacks before dinner. Jamal was learning how to read legal transcripts and how to live without a father. When his dad died, Jamal didn't cry in public, not at the funeral, not when the box of his father's things arrived. Not when the news report aired for 20 seconds and then moved on to the next story. But that silence didn't mean he accepted it. It meant something else. He was already thinking. At 11, Jamal had no legal team, no guidance, no roadmap. But he had a question that wouldn't go away. Why? So he started with what he could control. Every week after school, while other kids were shooting hoops or playing video games, Jamal took the city bus to the downtown library. The first time he asked for court records, the clerk laughed, until Jamal handed over his father's full name, case number, and date of sentencing. He had memorized them. "You sure you want to read this, kid?" "I don't want to," Jamal answered. "I have to." He sat for hours at a dusty microfilm machine, scrolling through scan after scan of faded pages. He didn't understand all the legal terms at first, but he brought a dictionary with him. He wrote down words he didn't know and came back the next day with the definitions circled. By 12, Jamal was visiting the courthouse archives. Not many people noticed a skinny black boy sitting outside the records office every Saturday, politely asking retired clerks if they remembered anything about the Williams case. One man did, a retired assistant clerk named Mr. Dorsey. Gray suit, quiet voice, eyes that had seen too much. They sat on a bench one afternoon, sorting through old paper boxes. "You're serious about this," Dorsey had said. Jamal nodded. "Because what they did to your father wasn't right." Mr. Dorsey didn't say much more, but he handed Jamal a folder, half-yellowed, edges torn, stamped exhibit not submitted. Inside was a witness statement from a man named Calvin Rhodes, a local handyman. White, middle-aged. He had been near the alleyway where the murder occurred, and he'd told police he saw someone leaving the scene, a tall white male with a shaved head and a limp. But Calvin's statement was never read in court, never entered into the official trial record, and most telling of all, it had been marked irrelevant by the prosecutor. Jamal stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. "I told them it wasn't the guy they had. I told them, but they said I must have been confused." His hands trembled, but not from fear, from clarity, because this was it. Not just a hole in the case, but a deliberate omission. Someone had made a choice to silence the one voice that could have cleared his father's name. At 13, Jamal copied that statement word for word into a notebook he kept under his mattress. At 14, he found a public records website that had archived articles from the trial and realized that Rhodes had tried to speak to the press but was discredited by the DA's office. At 15, Jamal called Calvin Rhodes himself. He was still alive, still in town, still willing to tell the truth. Some boys grow up playing detective. Jamal grew up being one. And now at 16, he sat in a courtroom, not just to defend himself from a crime he didn't commit, but to expose the one the system tried to erase. Some truths don't die, they wait. And sometimes the people who bury them leave someone behind who can dig them back up. Just when the courtroom seemed to settle, just when the silence after Jamal's revelations had stretched thin, a man stood from the back row. He looked to be in his early 50s, clean-cut, quiet, dressed like someone who didn't expect to speak, but had decided he couldn't leave without doing so. He cleared his throat. "Your Honor, may I say something?" Everyone turned. Even Harding looked startled, not just by the request, but by the man himself. The bailiff started to move, but the judge raised a hand. "State your name," Harding said, his voice cautious. "Mark Dalton. I'm the son of the late Chief Thomas Dalton, former sheriff of this county." That name sent a ripple through the room. A few heads turned sharply. Others whispered, "That Dalton?" beneath their breath. Mark reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn cassette tape and a typed transcript folded in thirds. He didn't approach the bench. He simply held it up, his voice steady. "Before my father passed, he left me this. Said it was something I needed to hear when I was ready. I listened to it 3 months ago, and after sitting here today, I think everyone needs to hear it too." The court clerk moved to take the tape and transcript. There was hesitation, but something in Mark's voice silenced resistance. The courtroom's audio system crackled softly as the old cassette began to play. The voice that came through was gravelly, weathered by time and years of command. "It was the Williams case. That boy, he didn't do it. I knew it. Hell, the whole damn station knew it. But the DA was under pressure. Press wanted a face. Community was furious. We didn't have a suspect, and the mayor's office was breathing down everyone's neck." There was a pause, a sigh. "We told ourselves he had a record. It'll stick. We knew Rhodes saw someone else, but he wasn't a good witness to begin with. So we buried the statement, made sure the jury never heard it." And then the final line. Soft, hoarse, broken. "We shouldn't have pushed that case. That boy, he didn't do it. But when no one confesses, the court steps in and makes someone pay. And we made sure it wasn't us." The tape clicked off. No one moved. Jamal didn't blink. Judge Harding closed his eyes for the briefest second. Mark Dalton stepped back, voice quiet now. I never knew what kind of man my father really was, but I know this. A mistake is one thing. A choice, that's something else. He sat down. The room was stunned into stillness, not from disbelief, but from the sudden, sickening understanding that what had happened to Derek Williams wasn't an accident. It was policy. It was convenience. It was fear, wrapped in procedure. Jamal looked toward the bench. For the first time since this trial began, it wasn't just his voice carrying the weight of truth. Now, the system had started to speak against itself, and that made it impossible to ignore. Some cracks don't form in darkness. Sometimes they form right under the brightest lights, when the truth shines too hard on something built to look perfect. Judge Harding sat still, his hand hovering near the gavel. It was there, right where it always was, solid, simple, symbolic. He had struck that gavel thousands of times in his career, each time with confidence, each time with finality. But this time, he couldn't bring himself to lift it. Some cracks don't form in darkness. Sometimes they form right under the brightest lights, when the truth shines too hard on something built to look perfect. Judge Harding sat still, his hand hovering near the gavel. It was there, right where it always was, solid, simple, symbolic. He had struck that gavel thousands of times in his career, each time with confidence, each time with finality. But this time, he couldn't bring himself to lift it. His fingers curled around it briefly. Then slowly, almost reverently, he pulled it away and placed it down beside him. The room didn't breathe. He stood, not quickly, not with the posture of a man in charge, but with the slow, heavy movement of someone carrying something no one else could see. Then, in a move no one expected, he stepped down from the bench. He descended the short set of steps, each one sounding louder than it should have, and walked to the center of the courtroom, where Jamal sat. Jamal didn't flinch. He looked up, calm, collected, quiet. Harding stood before him. No robe could protect him now. For a moment, he said nothing. Then finally, with a voice that no longer sounded like a judge, but like a man, he spoke. I told myself that I did what was right, that the system wasn't broken, that we got it right. He swallowed hard. The courtroom was still, but I didn't get it right. I didn't even try. He looked down at Jamal, not with pity, not even apology at first, but with something deeper. Recognition. I let fear make decisions. I let public pressure become my compass, and I silenced every doubt I had because it was easier than admitting I might be wrong. A pause. But I was wrong. He stepped a little closer. Your father was not guilty. He was not a threat. He was not a case number. He was a man, a father, and he died because I didn't have the courage to listen. A hush spread across the gallery. You could hear someone sniffle, another reach for a tissue. I don't expect forgiveness, not from you, not from anyone in this room, but I do owe you the truth. He looked around the courtroom, not as a judge, but as a man unraveling under the weight of his own silence. I sentenced your father with words I never truly believed, but hearing his voice today, hearing yours, that silence inside me finally broke. He looked back at Jamal. I'm sorry, son. I can't undo what I've done, but I see you, I hear you, and I promise, no one will ever silence your father's name again. Jamal didn't respond. He didn't nod. He didn't cry. He just stared. Eyes locked on the man who had once destroyed his world, now crumbling beneath the weight of the truth. In that moment, there were no roles, no judge, no defendant, just two men. One who had lost everything, and one who had finally realized it. And all around them, a courtroom full of people who would never see justice the same way again. There are moments in life when history doesn't just happen, it's rewritten. And sometimes the pen that signs a new beginning is held by the same hand that once caused the pain. Judge Harding stood still for a long time after his apology. Not out of fear, not out of pride, but out of something heavier, accountability. Then slowly, without being asked, without waiting for protocol, he turned, walked back to the bench, and reached for a document on the clerk's table. It was already there. A form no judge likes to use, but one that exists for moments like this. Petition to reopen case, Derek Williams. The courtroom held its breath. Harding read it quietly, though he didn't need to. He knew every word by heart. He had read it 6 years ago, and rejected it. But now, with hands that no longer trembled, he picked up his pen. The same one he had used to sign the sentencing order all those years ago. and this time he signed something else. An admission, a correction, a restoration. The pen hit the paper softly, but it echoed like a thunderclap. He looked up. The case of Derek Williams will be reopened, effective immediately. All previous findings are hereby vacated pending review. A soft murmur moved through the room, not noise, but something closer to release. In the gallery, people wiped their eyes. A reporter gently lowered her camera, as if capturing the moment felt too intimate. Jamal sat still. No tears, no smile, just silence. Then slowly he stood, his voice low, almost a whisper, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "I'm not here for revenge," he said. "I never was." He turned to face the courtroom, not just the judge. "I don't want apologies or sympathy. I just want my father remembered as what he truly was. A man, a good man, an innocent man." A pause. Not a case file, not a headline, not a name that disappears into dust. He looked down for a second, then back up. He deserved better, and now, at least, he'll get that. The room held its silence with reverence now. Not out of duty, but out of respect. Because in that courtroom, something rare had just happened. Justice didn't shout. It didn't gloat. It simply stood up and corrected itself. And the boy who made it happen? He didn't need the last word. He'd already said everything that mattered. The courthouse doors swung open with a soft creak, and the sunlight spilled across the marble steps like a quiet benediction. The same boy who had walked in wearing cold steel on his wrists now walked out under warm light, head held high. Jamal stepped outside slowly. No cheering crowd, no camera flashes blinding him. Just the sound of the wind rustling trees and the quiet shifting of feet from those who had watched the impossible unfold inside. He paused at the top of the steps, looked out into a world that hadn't changed much, at least not yet. But he had. He wasn't just the boy who had been accused, or the boy who lost his father. He was the boy who spoke. The one who made them listen. A reporter stepped forward, holding a mic. She didn't push. She didn't rush. "Jamal," she asked gently, "do you feel like you've won?" He thought for a moment, then answered with the same calm clarity that had silenced a courtroom just hours before. "I didn't come here to win," he said. "I came here to be heard." And for the first time, they listened. There was nothing dramatic in his voice, no pride, no bitterness, just truth. He walked down the steps slowly, past officers who now looked away, past strangers who nodded with quiet respect, past the shadows of a system that had once swallowed his father whole. Change doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the voice of a child brave enough to stand in front of power and not flinch. Jamal didn't need a stage or a title or a robe. All he needed was truth and the courage to carry it. And maybe, just maybe, that's how justice begins. Not with applause, not with vengeance, but with a boy standing in the right room at the right time and refusing to stay silent. If this story touched your heart, even just a little, we hope you'll take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories for more powerful, meaningful tales like this one. Stories like Jamal's remind us that justice isn't always loud. It doesn't always wear a robe or carry a badge. Sometimes it's just a voice, a young, brave voice, asking to be heard. At Mr. Mac's Stories, we believe in the power of storytelling to spark empathy, to challenge the way we see the world, and to remind us of the dignity that every human being deserves. Your support, your likes, your shares, your comments, they're not just numbers, they're fuel. They help us keep creating, keep reaching, and keep telling the kinds of stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. So thank you for being here, for listening, for believing that one voice, maybe even yours, can make a difference. We're Mr. Mac's Stories, and we'll see you in the next one.
A 15-year-old black teen boards his first solo flight proudly sitting in seat 1A, a seat his father reserved just for him. But when a wealthy white woman demands he give it up, claiming that seat has always been hers, everything changes. What would you do if someone tried to take away what you rightfully deserve, just because of the color of your skin? Tell us in the comments, have you ever faced a moment when you had to stand up for your dignity? We'd love to hear your story. Let's go back to where it all began, on what should have been a peaceful flight, but turned into a moment that challenged at everything. The first time Miles Bennett flew on a plane, he was 6. He didn't care about legroom or boarding groups or complimentary drinks. He cared about one thing, holding his dad's hand the entire time. That was enough. But today was different. At 15, Miles sat in seat 1A of the first-class cabin alone. No father beside him, no hand to squeeze, just the quiet hum of the aircraft and a window view stretching endlessly into a golden sky. It wasn't just any seat, it was the seat. The one right by the window, the one his father had chosen, reserved, paid for, not because it was luxurious, but because it meant something. Earlier that morning, his father, Julian Bennett, had stood beside him at the airport curb, pressed a hand to Miles's shoulder, looked him in the eye and said, "This seat isn't about comfort, Miles. It's about knowing where you belong and not letting anyone make you feel otherwise." Julian wasn't just a father. He was a name, founder and CEO of Bennett Technologies, a man whose photo appeared in magazines, who gave keynote speeches in conference halls, who built things the world used every day. But to Miles, his dad wasn't the man in headlines. He was the man who sat across the kitchen table every Sunday talking about respect, resilience, and how to walk into a room with quiet dignity. Being black, he once told Miles, means you'll carry weight other people won't see, so carry it well. Miles exhaled softly, letting the words settle. The leather seat cradled his back. The cabin smelled faintly of citrus and warm fabric. Around him, first-class passengers were still settling in zipping bags, tucking jackets, flipping through safety cards. No one noticed him. No one needed to. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. A soft voice interrupted the silence. "Would you care for a drink, Mr. Bennett?" He looked up, startled for just a second. "Yes, ma'am. Orange juice, please." The attendant smiled and returned with a glass, chilled, not too full. He took it with both hands, careful, almost ceremonial. A quiet sense of pride flickered across his face as he took a sip. It wasn't the juice, it was the moment. He looked out the window. The sun was beginning to dip, spreading gold across the clouds like melted metal. The light poured onto his lap, soft and warm like the last breath of summer. Everything felt calm, still, whole. He reached for his phone and unlocked it. A photo appeared, his dad crouched beside a young student at a community event tying the boy's shoe. No cameras, no speeches, just a quiet act of presence. Miles smiled. That's who he was, and that's who Miles wanted to be. He locked the screen and placed the phone face down beside him, sat back, exhaled, let the silence hold him like a coat. He didn't think about how many people looked at a kid like him in first class and assumed it was a mistake. He didn't need to think about it, because this moment wasn't given, it was earned. This seat wasn't about privilege, it was about purpose. And that's when he heard it. Click, click, click. High heels, sharp, measured, purposeful. Coming from the back of the cabin, drawing closer. Miles turned his head slightly, catching only a glimpse in the reflection of the window. A cream-colored coat, a rigid posture, a presence that didn't wait to be acknowledged. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what she wanted. But he knew even before she spoke that the quiet was about to break. The heels stopped 2 rows behind him. Miles didn't turn. He stayed still, eyes on the clouds outside, trying not to let the rhythm of those clicks follow him into his thoughts. But he could feel it, that shift in the air, when someone enters a space not with curiosity, but with claim. A voice floated above his shoulder, measured, smooth, sharp. "Excuse me, sweetheart. Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Miles blinked once, then turned, slowly. Standing in the aisle was a white woman in her mid-50s, elegant, in the way that money old enough to forget where it came from often is. She wore a cream-colored coat that matched her pressed slacks, pearl earrings, and a look that had long grown used to getting exactly what it asked for. Her hair was tightly styled, her posture even tighter. She didn't smile. Miles sat upright. "Yes, ma'am, this is seat 1A. The woman didn't respond right away. Instead, she gave a tight-lipped smile, the kind that curled upward without ever touching the eyes, then turned to the flight attendant just a few feet away. "There's been a mistake," she said. "This seat is always mine." The attendant, a young man named Greg with calm eyes, walked over and tapped the screen on his tablet. He checked once, then again. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Chase," he said, "but according to our records, seat 1A was reserved in the name of Mr. Miles Bennett." The woman, Veronica Chase, as her platinum membership tag confirmed, didn't look at the screen. She kept her gaze on Miles, the corner of her mouth twitching, as if the name alone had confirmed what she already believed. "Well, he must be confused," she said, her voice sugar slick. "Perhaps a gate mix-up. First class can be overwhelming for some." She didn't say boys like him. She didn't have to. The implication hung in the air like perfume sweet at first, then suffocating. Greg shifted awkwardly, glancing between the two of them. No mix-up, ma'am. His boarding pass matches the manifest. Veronica's smile flattened. Her tone cooled. I'm a platinum elite. I always sit in seat 1A when I fly. For over 15 years. You can ask anyone. Miles didn't speak. He didn't move. He kept his hands folded in his lap, one thumb pressing gently into the other. He wasn't new to this tone. The tone that wasn't loud but assumed. The tone that sounded like policy but meant place. Veronica let out a small laugh, almost a scoff, but prettier, then leaned slightly toward Greg. I'm not trying to cause a scene. I just think it's odd that a child traveling alone would be assigned a seat usually reserved for executive-level passengers. Another pause. Strategic. Calculated. Greg took a breath. Again, ma'am, his ticket and reservation are confirmed. Veronica finally turned to Miles directly, her voice still sweet, her expression not. Sweetheart, it's not your fault. I'm sure someone else made this mistake, but wouldn't you be more comfortable somewhere else, maybe near the front of economy? Miles looked up at her, calm, respectful. His voice didn't shake. Thank you, ma'am, but I'm fine right here. And there it was. A refusal. Polite, clear, immovable. Veronica blinked, taken aback not by the words but by the way they were said. She was used to resistance. She was not used to dignity. The tension shifted, small but palpable. A passenger in row 2 peeked over a magazine. Someone coughed. Greg cleared his throat and stepped back. For a moment no one moved, not Veronica, not Miles. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look away. He simply remained where he was, where he belonged. And for the first time, Veronica Chase felt something unfamiliar in the air. She might not win. Veronica stood there, her lips drawn tight, her fingers grazing the edge of the headrest in front of her. One perfectly manicured nail, tapping. Greg gave a small, professional smile and turned to step away, but her voice caught him mid-turn. Call the supervisor, she said evenly. Now. Greg hesitated for half a beat, then gave a quiet nod and disappeared toward the front of the cabin. Miles remained still. He wasn't angry, not yet, just aware. Aware that the quiet comfort of his seat had shifted into a spotlight. That his presence in 1A was now a problem that needed to be handled. The other passengers weren't staring, not openly, but the silence said enough. A turned page slowed down. A drink paused midair. He could feel the hover of attention. He took another sip of orange juice. The glass trembled slightly against his lip, just enough for him to notice. The click of new heels replaced the old ones. Firmer, quicker, more official. A woman in her early 40s approached with a clipboard in one hand and a tablet in the other. She wore the navy blue blazer of a flight supervisor, her blonde hair pulled tightly into a bun. Good afternoon, I'm Renee Thompson, the in-flight supervisor. I understand there's a concern regarding seat 1A. Veronica's tone shifted instantly, no longer irritated but practiced. Smooth, controlled. Yes, I've flown with your airline for over 15 years as a Platinum Elite member. I always sit in seat 1A. Always. And today I'm being told rather coldly that it's been given away to a child. She didn't look at Miles as she said the word. She didn't need to. Renee turned to Greg, who stood nearby like a student being questioned. He nodded. Yes, ma'am, the ticket is valid. Mr. Bennett was checked in by gate staff. Everything's confirmed. Renee glanced at her tablet, then at Miles. Mr. Bennett, I understand this might be your assigned seat, but we do sometimes make minor adjustments when seating conflicts arise, especially to avoid delaying departure. Her tone wasn't harsh, but it carried weight, administrative weight. Miles nodded politely. Yes, ma'am, but this is the seat my father reserved for me. Renee gave a soft smile, the kind that looked kind, but felt like a quiet nudge. I completely understand, and you've done nothing wrong, of course. But Mrs. Chase is a long-standing member, and she's requesting her usual seat. Perhaps we can move you just a few rows back still, in first class. You'd have a quiet window spot all to yourself. The words sounded reasonable. They always do. But Miles heard what wasn't being said. Make it easier for us. Don't be difficult. Don't hold us up. He looked at the juice in his hand. The condensation had begun to pool at the bottom of the glass. His thumb was pressing too tightly against the rim now. A quiet grip of conflict. He didn't look up right away, because if he did, they might see the flicker of doubt. The question rising in his own mind, is this really worth it? Renee's voice softened further. It's just a small favor, really. We can even add Miles to your account as a thank you. I'm sure your father would understand. The mention of his father did something. Miles inhaled slowly, his jaw flexed once. Then he looked up, calm, measured. "I'm sorry, Miss Thompson. I'd like to stay in the seat that was assigned to me." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Renee blinked, surprised at his tone, not rude, just firm. Veronica stepped forward, slightly, eyes narrowing. Is he seriously refusing? Are we really going to delay the entire flight over a child's tantrum? The word tantrum landed like a slap dressed as concern. Greg cleared his throat. "The flight's still boarding, ma'am." But the atmosphere had shifted again. What started as a misunderstanding was now a disruption. And Miles, was now the cause. He brought the glass back to his lips but didn't drink. His grip tightened slightly enough that a small crack appeared at the base of the stem. No one else seemed to notice. But Miles felt it. And somewhere deep in his chest, a voice, his father's voice, was already whispering. "Hold your seat." The supervisor moved on. Veronica didn't. She remained standing in the aisle, arms folded across her chest, lips pursed tight like a principal waiting for a student to break. But Miles didn't look at her, not anymore. He stared out the window again, though he wasn't really seeing anything now. The golden sky was still there, but it felt further away. Around him, the cabin had grown heavy, not loud, just dense. The woman 2 rows ahead, possibly in her 60s, shifted in her seat with a quiet sigh. She didn't look at Miles, but the tilt of her head, the slow blink, it spoke volumes. Another delay, another disruption. A man across the aisle, older, maybe mid-70s, neatly dressed in a tan blazer, adjusted his newspaper. Deliberately, loudly, as if to reestablish order. He never raised his eyes. No one said a word. But somehow that made it worse, because silence has texture. And this one was made of disapproval. Miles felt it in his chest, a slow pressure, like a belt tightening around his ribs. Not quite pain, not yet, but close. The orange juice sat untouched now. His fingers had finally relaxed, but the condensation had left a wet ring on the tray table, slowly drying into nothing. He wasn't angry. He wasn't scared. He was shrinking. And that's when it happened. Veronica leaned slightly toward him, voice low enough to seem private, loud enough for the nearest rows to catch every word. "This isn't your place. This isn't your world." Just 6 words, but they didn't land like a whisper. They landed like a stone to the chest. Miles blinked. His breath caught, just for a moment. He turned slowly toward her. "I'm sorry," he said, voice thin but steady. Veronica didn't blink. "You're clearly not used to this kind of setting. That's fine. But maybe next time your family should choose something more appropriate." There it was, fully unwrapped. Not a misunderstanding, not discomfort, contempt. She wasn't trying to take a seat anymore. She was trying to put him back in his place. The nearby passengers still didn't say anything. No one gasped. No one challenged her. But a few eyes previously buried in magazines and phones were now peeking up sideways over the top of glasses. Curious but distant, observing, not engaging. Not one came to his defense. Miles felt heat crawl up at the back of his neck. He sat straighter, then slumped slightly. His hand moved to his armrest, gripping it briefly, then let go. He thought about standing, just getting up, ending it. Give her what she wanted. Make it easy for everyone else. Make the silence stop. For a moment, he even shifted in his seat. His left foot slid slightly toward the aisle. It would be quick, clean, forgettable. But then he remembered. A hallway at school. Freshman year. A teacher mispronouncing his name 5 times in front of the class. He'd said nothing. At the time, it felt harmless. But later that night, his father had asked how the first day went. Miles had shrugged. Fine. Julian paused, then said simply, "You don't have to shout to be heard, but don't let silence erase you either." The words returned now, not loud, not heroic. Just there, a thread pulling him back to himself. Miles sat back in his seat, both feet grounded, shoulders square. He didn't say a word, but he didn't move either. Veronica noticed. Her lips tightened again. The moment hadn't gone the way she expected, and yet she wasn't done. The plane wasn't in the air yet, and neither was this fight. The weight of the silence still pressed against Miles' chest. He hadn't moved. Not since Veronica's words. Not since the stairs began piling up like invisible hands pushing him back into the shadows. The plane was nearly full now. Carry-ons clicked, shut overhead. Flight attendants moved briskly through the aisles, checking latches, smiling politely, offering practice nods. And then Lily appeared. She was younger than the other crew. I'm from Shiramu. Maybe mid-20s. Her steps were light but purposeful. Auburn curls tied back into a neat ponytail badge pinned over her navy vest. She didn't glance around like others. She already knew what had happened. She passed row 1 without stopping. But then, she turned back. For a moment, she simply stood there beside him. Not rushed, not uncomfortable, just present. Then with a movement so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by anyone not watching closely, she placed her hand gently on Miles's shoulder. Not firm, not dramatic, just a steady, quiet press. Miles froze, his eyes shifted upward, meeting hers. She didn't speak. She didn't have to, because her eyes said everything. Don't let them take your place. The gesture lasted only a second, maybe less. Then she nodded almost imperceptibly and continued down the aisle as if nothing had happened. But something had. Something cracked not in Miles but around him. The fog of isolation lifted just slightly, enough for him to breathe again. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, then leaned back into the seat, letting the leather catch his shoulders. And that's when the memory surfaced. He was 9, sitting on the front steps of their old brownstone after a school assembly where he hadn't been picked for the student council despite having the highest marks. The teacher told him the others were just more familiar to the student body. Julian sat beside him, both of them watching traffic go by. The quiet had stretched long until Miles finally asked, "Do you think I didn't smile enough?" Julian had chuckled softly, then replied, "One day someone will try to shrink you, son. Make you feel small, confused, unsure. When that happens, just remember it only means you already stand tall." Those words returned now with unexpected clarity, like a note replaying on an old record. Steady, simple, true. He closed his eyes for a moment, let them settle. Then without hesitation, he reached for his phone. It wasn't panic that moved him. It wasn't fear. It was something quieter, a need for alignment, for anchor. He unlocked the screen and scrolled to the favorite mark, Dad. One tap. The phone rang once, twice. Then Julian's voice came through deep calm, as if he'd been waiting. "Miles, talk to me." Hearing it just that made something in Miles' chest unclench. He didn't launch into the story, didn't cry, didn't plead. He just exhaled and said, "It's happening." There was a pause on the other end. Not confusion, not surprise, just understanding. "Okay," Julian replied. "Where are you?" "First class, seat 1A. Someone's trying to take it. Supervisor's pushing. No one's saying anything." Another pause. Then Julian asked softly, "Are you okay?" Miles looked out the window. The sunset was almost gone now. Just streaks of soft blue and fading orange. "Yeah," he said quietly. I needed to hear your voice. That's all." Julian didn't ask what he meant. He didn't need to. "You hold your ground," his father said, steady as ever. "I've got the rest." Miles nodded even though his dad couldn't see it. "Okay." The call ended. Miles lowered the phone slowly and placed it gently on the tray table. He didn't lean forward this time. He didn't shrink. He sat tall, shoulders squared, eyes calm. Whatever was coming next, he wasn't facing it alone anymore. And Veronica, still watching from 2 rows back, noticed something unsettling. He looked ready. At the top floor of the Bennett Technologies headquarters, floor-to-ceiling windows framed a breathtaking view of the city. But Julian Bennett wasn't looking at the skyline. He was locked into a boardroom of executives, analysts, and attorneys, his eyes moving across quarterly projections and billion-dollar merger terms. His voice when he spoke was clear, deliberate. People listened not because he shouted, but because he never needed to. A high-stakes negotiation was underway, the kind that made headlines, the kind that changed markets. And then his phone buzzed. He didn't check it right away, not until it buzzed again, a quiet second vibration that no one else noticed. But he knew the rhythm. Miles. Julian glanced at the screen. "One missed call, one message, call me when you can." His eyes paused. The room around him continued, voices pitching upward, overlapping. Julian raised a single finger. The room fell quiet instantly. "Pause the review," he said simply. "I need 10 minutes. No one questioned him. No one ever did. Julian stepped out into his private office and closed the door behind him. The hum of the boardroom faded. He took a breath, then called his son. And when he heard Miles say "it's happening," he understood more than just the words. He heard the weight behind them, the restraint, the tension held in check. Julian listened carefully, never interrupting. When Miles finished, he didn't rush to fix anything. He didn't explode with outrage. He asked one thing, "Are you okay?" And when he heard, "Yeah, I just needed to hear your voice," Julian closed his eyes briefly, letting the moment settle in. Then he said, "This isn't about a seat. It's about who you are in a world that will test you." He paused. "And you passed the first test. Now let me handle the rest." Miles said nothing, but Julian could hear the exhale. A shift, a quiet steadiness returning. They hung up without fanfare. Julian turned and walked to his desk and picked up a different phone. A direct line, the kennel used only when a situation needed to be handled off the record with no delay. He dialed. No assistant, no secretary, straight through. 2 rings. Then a voice answered, measured, professional, but slightly tense. This is Alan Price. Julian didn't waste a second. My son is currently aboard flight 627 en route to Washington. Seat 1A. He's being harassed by a platinum passenger, and your crew is pressuring him to move. Silence. You know who I am, Alan. You also know I don't call unless it matters. Alan cleared his throat. Yes, Mr. Bennett, of course. I wasn't aware of any issue on board, but I'll get the full report immediately. Julian's tone remained calm, but the words were cut glass precise. This needs to be handled. Quietly. Decisively. I don't want a public apology. I don't want press coverage. I want accountability, and I want my son left alone. Alan replied quickly, voice slightly breathless. Understood. I'll reach the onboard supervisor and dispatch a senior rep to meet the plane. I give you my word we'll make this right. Julian nodded, though Alan couldn't see it. Good. I'll be watching. He ended the call. No threats, no theatrics. Then he returned to the boardroom, picked up the laser pointer, and calmly resumed the negotiation like nothing had happened. Meanwhile, back on the plane, Miles sat in seat 1A. He didn't know the details of what had just unfolded in a quiet glass office far above the city. He didn't know who had been called or what words had been spoken, but he felt it. In the air, in the shift of energy around him. The cabin crew had gone unusually quiet. Veronica Chase, still standing by the galley, seemed suddenly unsure of herself. Her confidence, so sharp minutes earlier, had dulled slightly like a blade that had been dropped. Miles didn't move. He didn't need to, because he understood now more than ever. Real power doesn't need to raise its voice. The cabin lights dimmed as boarding completed. Passengers fastened seatbelts with clicks and sighs. Most thought the incident in row 1A had reached its awkward conclusion, a boy standing his ground, a woman fuming in silence. But someone in seat 3C had other ideas. 23-year-old Erin Kim, digital marketing assistant and social media enthusiast, had been quietly filming the exchange ever since Veronica Chase raised her voice. She hadn't planned to until she heard the words, "This isn't your world." That line had sliced through the hum of the cabin like ice. Erin hadn't been able to ignore it. So she recorded. And now, while the final bags were being stowed and the plane idled on the tarmac, she tapped her screen and hit upload. This kid was just told to give up his seat in first class because someone didn't think he belonged. Not today. Let Miles fly. She didn't think much would happen. She was wrong. 20 minutes later, while the plane still hadn't taken off, the clip had already gained traction. First a dozen likes, then hundreds, then thousands. And someone added subtitles. Someone else reposted it to TikTok. And then just like that, it caught fire. Hashtags popped up like sparks from Coach, "Let Miles fly." Seat 1A, sharp, he belongs. By the time the flight crew began final takeoff checks, the video had climbed into Twitter's U.S. trending tab. Inside the aircraft, the crew didn't yet know, but headquarters did. Calls flooded the airline's PR office. Emails pinged with subject lines like, "Urgent media inquiry, video from Flight 627 and public backlash incoming." A crisis team was assembled within 15 minutes, and 2 senior executives were dispatched straight to the runway. Back in the cabin, things still looked calm on the surface, but underneath, something had shifted. Miles could feel it. He didn't know about the video, the hashtags, but the atmosphere was no longer just cold silence. It was charged, like the moment before a summer storm breaks. Veronica felt it too. Her posture stiffened. She glanced around more than before, eyes scanning faces, not with pride this time, but with caution. Greg, the flight attendant, was now whispering to the supervisor by the galley. His body language spoke of unease. And then it happened. The cabin door opened, which never happens after final boarding. 2 men stepped in, both in dark suits, both with gold security lanyards around their necks. One older with salt and pepper hair. The other younger but equally composed. Their presence didn't scream authority. It whispered it. Passengers turned. Phones came out. Even those who had ignored the earlier drama now leaned into the tension. The older man spoke first. His voice was calm, but carried the kind of precision that made people sit straighter. "Good evening. I'm Robert Evans, Senior Operations Officer for the airline. This is Matthew Hughes, our Director of Flight Integrity. We've been made aware of a situation on board." No one breathed. "We'd like to speak briefly with your cabin supervisor and review the seating concern involving passenger Miles Bennett." The name alone caused Veronica to flinch. Not the boy, not seat 1A, but his name. That meant something. Greg stepped aside. Renee, the supervisor, appeared pale as she nodded and led the men toward the galley. They spoke in hushed tones, but the posture of the executive said it all. This wasn't routine, this was a response. 5 minutes passed. Then Robert Evans returned to the front of the cabin. His expression had shifted firmer now, sharper. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. After reviewing the matter, we want to make clear passenger Miles Bennett is in his correct assigned seat. He will remain here undisturbed. A quiet murmur rippled through the cabin relief from some discomfort from others. Veronica opened her mouth to object, but before she could form a word, Evans added, "We take the dignity and rights of every passenger seriously. Any further interference will be treated as a disruption to flight safety." And just like that, the storm outside had arrived inside the cabin, but not the storm Miles feared. This one didn't isolate him. It surrounded him, and it stood with him. The cabin settled into a different kind of stillness, not the strained silence from before, not discomfort. This was something else the breath held before consequence. Robert Evans, the senior airline officer, stood at the front of the first-class cabin. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry, but the weight of his presence filled the space in a way no shouting ever could. Beside him, Matthew Hughes held a slim black tablet. The screen glowed softly in his hand. Evans turned to the flight supervisor. "Miss Renee Thompson, step forward, please." Renee hesitated, her face pale, her hands nervously clasped in front of her. She walked to the front of the cabin, avoiding eye contact with the passengers. Her voice was barely audible. "Yes, sir." Evans didn't blink. "You were made aware of a seating dispute on this flight. Can you confirm the actions you took once the issue was presented to you?" Renee swallowed hard. I asked the passenger in seat 1A if he would be willing to move to resolve the conflict peacefully. Was that passenger properly ticketed and confirmed for 1A? Yes. Did you suggest he moved despite that confirmation? Renee hesitated again. Yes, but only because... Thank you. That's enough for now. She fell silent. Then Evans turned slightly toward Veronica Chase. She didn't move. "Mrs. Chase," Evans said clearly, "we'd also like to hear from you." Veronica stood slowly. Her expression had shifted. No longer indignant, no longer smug, just uncertain. She opened her mouth. "I was simply requesting the seat I've always had." Matthew Hughes, still silent until now, tapped the tablet. The soft sound of a recording played through the small speaker. "This isn't your place. This isn't your world." Veronica froze. The voice on the recording was unmistakably hers. Sharp, slow-laced with something far beyond annoyance. A murmur rippled through the cabin. No one said a word, but the air turned electric. Evans let the silence do the work. He didn't glare. He didn't accuse. He simply nodded once toward Hughes. Matthew spoke for the first time. "In light of this recording and the disruption caused effective immediately, Mrs. Chase's Platinum Elite status is permanently revoked. She will be placed on a restricted list and barred from future flights with this airline pending full review." Veronica's face drained of color. "What? You can't. I've spent years." Evans raised a hand gently, not to stop her, but as final punctuation. "Mrs. Chase, please return to your seat. Our crew will escort you off the plane upon landing." She didn't speak again. She sat down, slowly, small, folded into herself in a way she hadn't been just minutes before. Evans turned back to Renee. "Ms. Thompson, effective immediately, you are relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight. You will be formally suspended pending internal investigation." Renee didn't argue. She simply nodded, her shoulders sagging, as she walked toward the rear galley, her authority already gone. And through it all, Miles remained still. Seat 1A had never looked more centered, more grounded. He hadn't spoken once since the executives boarded. He didn't need to. He sat with his spine straight, eyes, calm hands gently folded in his lap. No gloating, no satisfaction, just quiet dignity. A few rows back, the woman who had sighed earlier now gave a subtle nod. The older man who had rustled his paper gently placed it down. Across the cabin, glances changed from annoyance to recognition to something close to respect. Lily, the young flight attendant, passed once more through the aisle. This time her eyes met Miles's for only a second. She didn't speak, but the corner of her lip curved a quiet acknowledgement. Evans stepped back to the front. He took a breath. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We apologize for the delay. We're now clear to depart." He gave a final nod to Miles, not as an officer, but as a man recognizing another. The door closed. The cabin exhaled. And somewhere deep within the engines, a quiet hum began to rise. At 32,000 feet, the plane hummed along above a bed of soft, endless clouds. The cabin, once heavy with tension, had quieted into something gentler. Trays down, reading lights on, soft murmurs of conversation here and there. But no one forgot. Miles remained in seat 1A, his posture relaxed now, not defensive, not guarded, just present. He wasn't scrolling his phone. He wasn't writing anything down. He just sat, eyes on the sky beyond the window, letting the stillness wrap around him. Julian never showed up. He didn't have to. His presence had already come and gone like the passing of a strong wind, silent, focused, effective. Not a storm, just pressure applied exactly where it needed to be, then gone. That was the kind of father he was. The kind who taught a boy how to stand tall before the world ever tried to make him small. About halfway through the flight, a soft voice came from the row behind him. "Excuse me, young man." Miles turned. An older man leaned forward, silver hair combed neatly back, hands folded over a worn leather wallet. His voice was low, almost like he was afraid to disturb the peace. "My grandson just texted me. He saw your video, said it's trending everywhere. Said to tell you thank you." Miles blinked, caught off guard. "I didn't do anything," he said quietly. The man smiled. "That's what makes it matter." No further words were exchanged, just a small nod. Then the man leaned back, letting the silence return between them. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one had weight, but not pressure, meaning. A little later, Lily passed through the aisle again. This time she didn't stop, just met Miles's gaze and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. A quiet promise that whatever happened here wouldn't be forgotten, not by her. A mother across the aisle reached down to adjust her toddler's blanket, then glanced at Miles for just a moment. Their eyes met. She didn't say anything, but her expression softened. A ripple. That's what it was. Not a revolution, not a headline, just a ripple stretching from one moment of dignity. Outside, the clouds slowly parted as the plane began its descent. The sunlight now filtered through in strips like golden rivers across the wings. And still Miles said nothing. No speech, no vindication, just peace. That was his victory. Because sometimes justice isn't about applause. It's about presence. About not letting the world move you from your seat, not when you know you've earned it. By the time the wheels touched down, most of the passengers had stopped glancing his way. The moment had passed, but the imprint remained. No one would say it aloud, but they would remember. Not the name, not the headline. The boy in seat 1A, the one who didn't move. A few days later, the noise had passed. The trending hashtags faded. News cycles moved on. Screens returned to other stories. But in one quiet home office, tucked behind a bookshelf filled with old civil rights biographies and tech design journals, Miles was still thinking about seat 1A. He stood in front of his corkboard, a silver thumbtack in hand. In his other hand, a boarding pass, faded slightly now, a little creased. Seat 1A. He pinned it carefully to the board center, deliberate. Not because it was a trophy, but because it was a marker, a reminder. Just beside it, already framed in the top corner, was a photo he'd looked at since he was old enough to read names. His grandfather, Ezekiel Bennett. Navy uniform, tidy mustache, eyes calm but sharp. A man who once told him with more sadness than anger that there were places he'd been asked to fight for, but not allowed to sit in. "One time I wore that uniform and still couldn't get a cup of coffee," he'd said. Miles stared at that photo now, not with sorrow, with clarity. His seat on the plane wasn't a prize. It was a continuation of every name that never made a headline, of every voice that never shouted back but refused to bend, of every hand that had to stay still when injustice whispered, "You don't belong." He sat down at his desk, looked at the board, looked at the name on the boarding pass, and slowly he whispered, not to anyone in the room, but to the memory that lived in every corner of it. This seat wasn't just mine. It was for every silent voice that came before me. Outside his window, the afternoon sun cast long golden lines across the wall. The hum of distant traffic rose and fell like breathing. He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel changed. But something inside him had settled, like a stone placed where it belonged, like a puzzle piece clicked into history. And maybe that's what justice really looks like. Not always a shout, not always a headline. Sometimes it's just staying seated when everything around you tells you to give in, give up, or disappear. You don't have to rise. You just have to remain firm, still, seen. Miles leaned back the corkboard in front of him. The ticket, the photo, the space between them. A grandfather who couldn't sit. A grandson who never stood. This story isn't just about a seat. It's about standing firm quietly for what's right. If this moved you, please like the video, share it, and subscribe to Mr. Max Stories for more powerful, meaningful stories like this one. Your support helps our team keep creating heartfelt content that matters. Because at Mr. Max Stories, we don't just tell stories, we tell stories that stay with you. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.